if you work hard and get an education, you can make something out of yourself. And it was not about the government making something out of you, or a mentor making something out of you, or someone else making something out of you. It was, if you did these things, you could make something out of yourself. And so even though, I'm not Horatio Alger rich, I do all right, but I am an American success story, and it's not a race story. My life is not a black story. It's an American story.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. How they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. Ay, we the people like Gates Garcia, so that's no excuse. We no longer scared to preach our values, getting loud. You not ready for the game.
Dr. Carol Swain went from high school dropout to a holder of 5 degrees. She has a tenure at Princeton and Vanderbilt, in addition to 3 presidential appointments. She has authored or co-authored 13 books. Today's discussion will center around her most recent and just released book, The Gay Affair. In it, Dr. Swain tells the story of Claudine Gay, Harvard's first black president who resigned only 6 months into the job. Among a disastrous testimony in Congress, it was revealed that Gay had committed serial plagiarism throughout her career, but none more notable than her 1997 PhD dissertation involving our guest's work. Among an extremely busy and demanding national media tour, we are fortunate that Dr. Carol Swain has chosen to come talk to we the people. Welcome, Dr. Swain.
Thank you so much. And I like the name of your organization, We the People, because of my Be the People, which is the title of a book I published in 2011, and my nonprofit, and just about everything I've done since 2011 has been about Be the People, which is a call to we the people to stand up and be the people who change our nation.
I love that. I mean, this was meant to be. This was years in the making, and the show is called We the People because it's not myself, it's not me that's hosting the show. It's really our audience that hosts the show. We like to hear from them. We like to talk to them. We like them to sort of feel like they're participating in the conversation, not eavesdropping on it. So we, the people, welcome you, and we thank you for being with us. I want to jump right in. So you've been on a number of shows, and you've talked about the book, and you've talked about the situation. But what struck me the most is you say that at any point, and we're going to get into the book, but I want to start here. At any point, had Claudine Gay picked up the phone, okay, and called you to apologize, this book wouldn't exist. Yet, you did write this book, and you took real risk to write this book. And part of this show is demonstrating to everyday Americans that risk is worth taking if you measure it appropriately. So I want to talk to you about that. You say in the book, you have a more noble purpose than merely exposing Harvard. So Dr. Swain, why did you write this book?
Well, first of all, I did not write the book to harm Claudine Gay. I wrote the book to hold Harvard University accountable because I believe that what happens at Harvard University impacts every institution in America, K through 12, from colleges and universities that look up to Harvard around the world to K through 12 education. And so when they downplay the significance of plagiarism, then it has an impact on everyone and everything else if they minimize the importance of it. I point out in the book how when Harvard did respond, they described it as duplicative language without attribution. That's another way, a fancy way of saying plagiarism, but it was a more palatable sounding duplicative language without attribution as opposed to plagiarism. They had her make some corrections, but as far as I know, there were no corrections of the problems I saw with her book, with her dissertation and her writings.
Right. What you did took so much courage. I mean, there's not a lot of people that would be able to call out and face down an institution like Harvard, but you did. So I want to talk about the process that you went through to weigh those risks. What did you anticipate would be the impact on your family, and what has that impact been?
Well, first of all, I want people to know that I did not just rush into thinking that I would take legal action against Harvard. And I talk about in the book how I went through a range of emotions. First, a deep sadness because I felt like I had been cheated, but I also felt bad for Claudine Gay. I thought she would lose her position. She actually did step down as president of Harvard University, but it was sadness, and then that gave way to anger. And the anger had to do with Harvard's reaction, and then later when Claudine Gay implied that it was racism that was forcing her to step down, that's when I responded to a lawyer who had contacted me about taking the case pro bono. After a few weeks with that lawyer, I went to a paid law firm, and there were letters that were sent to Harvard, and they responded. And it really upended my life because once I went down that path, that was all I could focus on. It meant that I abandoned projects that I was working on, my memoir in particular, because of the case. I was pursuing the legal route until around May, June. It became clear that that would not be very wise. At that point, I decided that I needed to get my side out in the public domain because a lot of people didn't understand it. They knew that Claudine Gay is a liberal and I'm pretty conservative, but they didn't know we're talking about work that was written. This action took place 26 years ago, and I was unaware of it. But 26 years ago, I was a Democrat, and I gradually became an independent and then a Republican. But my views have always been common sense, but pretty much I was not this conservative black Christian woman that I am today.
Well, it's no surprise on this show among our viewers and listeners that common sense led you to switch from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. And we're going to talk more about that. We're also going to talk about something you mentioned in there, which is this sadness that you felt and the emotions that you went through when you found out that you had been plagiarized. But first, I just want to stay on this courage theme for one more moment, because Dr. Swain, when I read your book, which was my first interaction with you, I had heard your story, but I hadn't seen you speak personally. Oh my gosh. I was like, well, I really want this woman on my show, but boy, she could kick my butt. She is a tough woman. I mean, you lay the law down in this book. But then I saw you speak. I watched you on Sage Steele. I watched you on all these other shows, and one word kept coming to mind: grace. You're one of the most graceful women I've ever seen. And it's rare, it's uncommon that someone with so much courage, that can be so fierce and so principled, can have such grace sort of as the foundation of that. So where does your grace come from?
Well, I'd like to say it comes from Christ, but I've always sort of been a compassionate softie. And as a professor, when I caught students plagiarizing papers, I think I always gave them a chance to rewrite the paper if I caught them. And I just did.
Oh, I needed you to be my professor in college. Where were you?
But the students were dealing with so much. And I can even tell you that as a university professor, I thought about if my children or grandchildren were away at college, I'd want there to be at least one professor they could go to. And so I had experiences with students that were contemplating suicide, or young women found out they were pregnant, or all kinds of parents' divorces that they would show up at my door, and so it went beyond just the subject matter. I tried to be there for them, and they had my cell number and my home number. I wanted, to be there for them, and I really cared about my students, and leaving academia was sad for me. And as far as courage, I have just been wired in a particular kind of way. I think about Martin Luther, and I know that he is a controversial figure because of his anti-Semitism, which I hated to learn about. But I resonate with his words, "Here I stand, I can do no other." Because I think that people see me and they think, I'm controversial, or I'm so bold and all of these things, but I'm wired in a particular way that I just can't walk away from certain kinds of injustices or things that I think are wrong. It gets under my skin, and I can't let it go. And I'm like a dog with a bone, and that's good and that's bad, I guess. But that's how I'm wired.
Well, what you said there about sort of the college experience strikes me because I went to two different colleges and I had very different experiences at each one. And the experience were mostly due to factors that I could control. But I will say, my second experience in college, I definitely felt a more personal connection with my professors. I certainly had professors who were more willing to sort of look at the human side of me rather than just the student side of me. I will also say that I played football in college, and when you have coaches and teammates and a tight-knit community around you and resources to reach out to in times of stress, because I wasn't going to school in my hometown, I couldn't go home to my parents, that makes a world of difference. So I commend you for sort of not just looking at the professor-student relationship as strictly academic, but also a personal one, because we're forming, when kids are in college, on average, they're 18 to 22 years old. I mean, these are the true formative years of their life, certainly as they enter into adulthood. And it's just so important. I wish more academics, more professors would take an approach like yours. But speaking of your
That
approach,
is
speaking
not
of this,
very rewarding because we are rewarded for
can you expand on
producing,
that?
not for
Yeah.
times you spend with students.
Well, let me ask you this then, because one thing we talk a lot on this show is how you measure success. And I think by the traditional academic measures that you just alluded to, it's sort of, all these U.S. News and World Report statistics. But when you are in the classroom, when you were in the classroom, how did you measure success?
With the students?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, one of the goals, especially towards the last few years I was teaching, I taught a course on the impact of communism on American political thought, or something like that. That was the goal, to reread to read the Communist Manifesto, some of their literature, and to bring people up through the 50s to where we are today. And my goal was to get students to think critically, because in my classes, they were exposed to more than one side of an issue. That I was not an indoctrination meal. I've never been an indoctrination meal, but I really wanted them to see where the things that were taking place, the roots of it. And I can remember a student telling me, Professor Swain, if you're correct, people like you wouldn't be allowed to teach at this university. And then I was thinking, well, I wonder what he thinks now. And
Yeah.
I ended up leaving academia in 2017. I took early retirement, but that had a lot to do with the environment. It had become toxic to my health, and I knew that I could not be my best self in life if I was in that kind of environment. And so I gave up my tenure by retiring, stepped out into the unknown, and basically God sort of remade me. And I believe that everything that happened was a tremendous blessing, because I would never have given up tenure and stepped out into the unknown if there had not been some heat around. And now I reach millions of people. Like, I have 6 PragerU videos, and if you add up all the places where they've been seen, it's more than 100 million views. And I have, been in so many documentary films. I think it's 11 or maybe 12 after the next one comes out. But I was a shy person most of my life. And when I think about me and the willingness to take on Claudine Gay, I believe that there is a God, that for whatever reason he selected me, he gave me my platform. In fact, he credentialed me at Princeton University, and that my life isn't about me. And I know that sounds strange to people, but I think that my life is a gift that was meant to be shared, and that if I can share things that happen, if I can do hard things, it encourages other people to do hard things. And when I write my memoir, there will be some experiences that I will relate that will involve the supernatural. And I believe other people have had experiences like the ones I've had, but they're afraid of being labeled as crazy, so they don't share these experiences. And I think if I share my experiences, it gives other people permission to share theirs.
Yeah. Yeah. So and you said a lot there. I could talk on that answer for the rest of the episode, but I've got to go back to, and we're going to come back to the book, but I've got to go back to the beginning. And these are things that I wanted to read in your bio
Okay,
at the
go ahead.
beginning of this episode. But I wanted to I wanted them to come in sort of the middle of the episode because I think it's so important to spend some time rather than just read your bio, spend some time and give our audience a perspective of who you are and where you came from. So the foundation that Carol Swain was built on, you grew up in abject poverty. Okay. Your stepfather physically abused your disabled mother.
Yes.
You grew up in a shack with no running
My mother
water.
was an alcoholic too, and so they both
Okay.
had dysfunction going on.
2 beds for 12
Well, that's
children.
not
11.
exactly correct.
Yeah. So
At the
you're
time we lived in that 2-room shack, there were probably only 9 children born, and there was a boy's bed and a girl's bed, and it was 7 boys and 4 girls. And so at that time, whatever that ratio was, that's what it was. So all 12 of us didn't live in the shack at the same time. Another thing in my bio is it says in Wikipedia that I worked at a McDonald's. It was actually a Burger King, and it was half a day.
well, I'm going to get to that. Let me finish bragging on you for a minute. But don't interrupt me while I'm bragging on you, Dr. Swain. So,
I just want to clarify it for the record so that if someone comes after me, I can go to this video and say, well, wait a minute, I corrected that.
if there's anyone that takes a historical record seriously, it's you. Okay. So you drop out of high school, and while you're earning your GAD, you spend a half a day at Burger King among door-to-door sales and everything else. And the rest is history. You graduate magna cum laude from college. You now have 5 degrees, including 2 masters and a PhD. You have early tenure at an Ivy League school, 3 national awards for your work, quoted in 3 Supreme Court cases. You've co-authored or authored 13 books. You're a mother, a grandmother, a great grandmother. I spend time reciting all of that because I have one question for you, Dr. Swain. Are you the greatest example of the American dream?
Well, you know something? I've always loved America. And I think about the time I was born in 1954, so I lived through the Civil Rights Movement. I went to segregated schools. I've seen it all. And I was raised by parents, despite the dysfunction, that they didn't preach hatred. I believed I lived in the greatest country in the world, and I was very proud of being a Virginian because our state was the home of presidents. We had 8 presidents produced in Virginia, and that was a huge point of pride for me. Even today, I'm proud to be a Virginian, even though I've not lived there since the 1980s. And so I think that back then, the messages were so different. And what I heard was that if you work hard and get an education, you can make something out of yourself. And it was not about the government making something out of you, or a mentor making something out of you, or someone else making something out of you. It was if you did these things, you could make something out of yourself. And so even though, I'm not Horatio Alger rich, I do all right, but I am an American success story, and it's not a race story. My life is not a black story. It's an American story.
I love that. And let's talk about America. And you alluded to this a little while ago, a lifelong Democrat. You left the party in 2009. Now, a lot of people have left the Democratic Party for the Republican Party, but a lot of them have done that and not supported Donald Trump. You did. And you've talked about that. You've said that it was your faith that led you to leave the party. You said a minute ago it was also common sense, but I want us to focus on your faith. Can you explain a little bit about the role that faith played in your political beliefs?
Well, I can tell you, I became a devout believer in 99, 2000. In fact, I was in New Haven. I got my last degree in 2000, and it was from Yale Law School. It was a master's in law. And that year that I was in New Haven doing the master's program, I started attending an inner city black church, and that's where I became a devout believer. I can't pinpoint when I became a believer because it was like a journey for me that at that point, while I was in New Haven, it's like my life all came together. I understood the meaning of my life, and I understood what it meant to follow Christ. And so I got rebaptized during that time. But as I grew in my faith, I became more and more conservative. I was not comfortable voting for Democrats, so I became an independent. I was not comfortable voting for Democrats, but I was also not comfortable becoming a Republican because I believed what I had heard all of my life, that the Republican Party was a party that was racist. And if you read my book, 2002 book, The New White Nationalism in America, some of the things I say about the Republicans were things that I, as a political scientist, that's what I was taught, that's what I believed. I don't really attack Republicans, but at that time that I wrote that book, which I say is spot on in its predictions, I was a Democrat moving towards independent. And then in 2009, I became an independent, but this was after George W. Bush had appointed me to 2 political appointments as an independent. And Barack Obama renewed one of those. So I've actually had appointments from Bush, Obama, and Trump.
That's got to be uncommonly rare.
Well, I guess President Obama didn't know who I was. Plus, it wasn't a high-level appointment. It was the Tennessee Advisory Committee to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. Bush had appointed me. Obama renewed it. And I was an independent at the time. And so then 2009, I became a Republican. And it was because my views as a Christian aligned more with Republicans. But I would be the first to say that there is no perfect political party. And when I think about Americans, I believe that we share more in common than most people realize. That as a Christian, I believe that when God said he wrote his law on the hearts and minds of people, that's true, and that intuitively people do have common sense, and they come out around the same place, and it's just politics that keeps us divided.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what I found so special about your book was, you when you open up a book, there's the acknowledgement section, and all these, famous people and fancy people and whatnot are mentioned, and you recognize everybody, all your peers in academia and professionals that have helped you over your life, but you start the acknowledgement section of your book by thanking your Sunday school members, your church members, your prayer group for the prayers they sent you. I just thought that was a beautiful way to sort of acknowledge, sort of the underpinnings of this book and what helped you with them. You also have, I've heard you talk about your journey to Christ and how shy you were before that and what changed after that. Can you just briefly mention that?
I was talking with someone recently, a couple of days ago, and he said, you still are shy. You still come across as shy. But I was so shy that I had to write out everything. If you asked me to introduce someone, I would write it out and I would read it, and the paper would be shaking. And if I was giving a speech, I tried to write out everything, and I would be clutching the lectern. I was petrified. And during the time I was at Princeton, I had an opportunity to be on Good Morning America with the first book. I turned it down because I was afraid. The Lord impressed on me, and this would have been around 2000, and this was after I'd gotten rebaptized, because all of a sudden, at some point, it came clear to me what it meant to follow Christ. Like, I knew the gospel, I knew the Christian message, but somehow it hadn't all clicked. But it came together for me in a way that I felt the need to get rebaptized. And I went through what I would call a honeymoon period with the Lord, where he sort of takes you backwards and forwards. And I saw the places where I had challenges in life and that he was always there. He knew me long before I knew him, but he impressed on my mind that he had given me a message bigger than me, and I should focus on the message. And I realized that shyness came from my fear of people laughing at me because of my funny Southern accent or because I'd make a grammatical mistake. That's what kept me silent. But once I only had to please God, all of a sudden I was free. And it's like I've been talking ever since, and I'm sure people wish that I would go back to being that person that was petrified. I'm not petrified. And when I'm doing media interviews, CNN, Lou Dobbs at that time, he was the first person to give me a national opportunity, and it was after a scandal involving the radio personality Imus. And then I was on Fox for a few years, and lots of opportunities came my way. But during the time I was doing those interviews, and I'm often, it's a situation like I am today. I'm in my home. I'm looking straight at a camera. I do have a monitor behind me where I can see your silhouette, but I'm trying to look into the camera. But I saw myself as communicating not just with the host, but the millions of people that would be watching. I was trying to get a message to them, and in some cases, I knew that I would not be invited back if I spoke truth, and I went ahead and I did it. And one time it was with the MSNBC. Was not invited back. But I said what I believed I needed to say. And I believe that my platform was a God-given platform and that I'm going to use it as long as I can. And I find also that whether it's a Democrat, a Republican, conservative, or liberal, people would like to control other people. They want you to say what they want you to say, and they don't want you to say anything that's going to make them feel uncomfortable. Whatever call I have on my life is a call that I might make you uncomfortable. Like I'm going to say what I think and I feel like I'm supposed to say, and there are consequences, and I've had to pay those consequences.
Well, I'll pay him for you because I commented on your ex just 2 days ago. You start every day, it seems like, on social media with sort of a morning devotional. And I think you have one of the most beautiful voices in the world. And for anybody that's ever given you any grief for your voice or accent or whatever they want to call it is a fool, because I think it's graceful. I think it's beautiful. I think it's soothing. And I have, for about the last 2 weeks since I started doing research for this episode, I have done a morning devotional with you every day, and it's been really special. So Dr. Swain, we play a little fun game on this show. We talk about serious things on this show, but we like to keep them lighthearted. And every guest that comes on the show leaves a question behind that we put in this jar, and they're all fun and lighthearted. And we'll have you do the same when you leave. So I am going to I'm going to pick one out of here, and we both have to answer it. And they can be quick. Okay. If a movie was cast about your life, who would you want to play the character that is you? And I'll give you a minute to think about it. I have to answer these too. I have been told since I was about 13 years old that I could be John Travolta's twin. And although the fact that he is about 30 years older than me, we've both gone bald, we've both grown beards, and apparently it's like looking in a mirror when people see the two of us together, although they've never seen us together because some people are convinced we're the same person. So I guess, unfortunately for me, I'd cast John Travolta, the 30-year senior, to myself to play me in a movie. But what about you?
Well, people have started to tell me recently that I look like Diane Carroll from the 60s.
Okay.
But if you asked me that question 10 years ago, I would say Halle Berry.
Okay. All right. I'll vote for that. Okay. I like that. That's good. All right. So let's go back to the book and sort of the themes there. One thing that struck me that you highlight is that, plagiarism for a student is treated very differently than plagiarism for an administrator or an academic. It's sort of like we hold students to a different standard than we do the administrators. Why is that? And what are we teaching young people in society when we give them messages like that?
Well, students don't have tenure, and they probably don't have money. Their parents might to hire lawyers. So that's one thing. But I'd like for the viewers to know that plagiarism is not a misdemeanor. It's not a felony. It's not even against the law to steal someone's ideas. And it can only be policed through institutions like colleges, universities. That's the world of ideas. We get rewarded for our ideas. It's the most valuable thing that we have. Institutions are supposed to police that. And when it comes to journalism, journalists, some of them have been caught plagiarizing. It used to destroy your career, not anymore. So we've already softened the penalty. So there's a double standard. And I guess the message is the message from Animal Farm that some animals are more equal than others.
Amen. Yeah. What else is academia getting away with?
They're getting away with destroying the whole enterprise because a college education, it used to be you were exposed to all these ideas. It was the marketplace of ideas. You take all these courses, you get challenged intellectually. I would argue that they've become indoctrination meals, and that parents and students are being shortchanged. And when it comes to professors that really do want to teach and they don't want the nonsense, it's very hard on them because under the environment that we've had over the past few years, any student that belonged to a protected group could get upset about something and challenge a professor. And sometimes it was a liberal professor, mostly it was conservative professors. There were clearly double standards, but it gave too much power to the students. And I felt like the administrators, who were often making over $1 million salaries, they were not earning their money because they were letting the inmates run the prison. And it certainly was becoming a prison. And I would like to see us go back to the original idea of the university. People have also lost a sight of the fact that most of the early universities, I believe 104 of the first 119, were Christian-based universities. They were created. The whole idea came from, the Western ideas, Western civilization, but it was to promote the church, Christ, and the kingdom. And if you look at those universities, they have strayed so far from their original mission and the vision of the people who set them up. I would like to force the students at Princeton and Harvard and the various institutions that were created, founded by people who were Christian, to read their mission statement. Read, at Harvard, read Veritas. Where did that come from? What does it mean? They need to really go back to their roots and try to figure out, do they care about the vision of their founders? What went wrong? And I think what went wrong was that people they loved ideas. They loved being entertained by ideas, but they were not prepared for people who had an agenda. And their agenda was to air their ideas until they got a critical mass and then curtail the speech of everyone else.
Right. So just a couple more questions for you, but they're important. You have a lot to say on DEI. You compare it to affirmative action in the early stages.
On steroids.
You talk about
affirmative action on steroids, DEI.
Okay, fair. All right. You talk about remembering when Black excellence was celebrated, but it seems like in this case, DEI led to the shortest presidency in Harvard history, 186 days. Claudine Gay played the race card when she got fired, but you could argue that it was the race card that got her hired. You said, and we talked about this earlier, and I said I was going to come back to this. You said you felt deep sadness for her and saw her as a victim of a system that had tried to meet quotas for racial and ethnic minorities. Can you expand on that and maybe the harm that DEI has actually done to minorities?
Well, in the book, I also say that the mid-1990s, affirmative action was seen as being threatened. There was a great fear that the Supreme Court would strike it down. And so the elites came together. The former president of Princeton, William Bowen, former president of Harvard, Derek Bach, they wrote a book, The Shape of the River, that made the case that there would be no Black leaders if they did not have affirmative action. I believe standards were dramatically lowered in the wake of that. Claudine Gay got her dissertation in 1997. I believe the book was published in 1995. And I think there's been a steady lowering of standards as colleges and universities have tried to meet quotas, racial and ethnic quotas. And with Claudine Gay, she would never, ever have even gotten tenure, I believe, at Princeton or at a Tier 1 university based on the articles she published, in a merit-based system. And so I think that she was fast-tracked, and some of the other minorities that have been accused of plagiarism or having very weak records, that they were fast-tracked, and that's part of the problem. And people will point the finger at me and say, well, you benefited from affirmative action. I argue that I benefited from the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Equal Protection Clause that opened up doors for people like me. I benefited from an environment where Americans wanted to see people do well. And so there was outreach, there was equal opportunity, which meant getting your feet in the door. It didn't mean that it was going to be an equal outcome, equity. It meant you got a chance to prove yourself. And during the era that I came through, there was the quest for integration, bring racial and ethnic minorities into the environment. They become a part of the whole. It wasn't this diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is almost like having a chip on your shoulder. You belong to a particular group. Assimilation became a dirty word. It was not a dirty word when I came through.
Yeah, so 2 more questions for you, and this one is very important for my audience. Your fight against Harvard is essentially David versus Goliath. You write in the book that Harvard essentially waved a finger in your face and says, you can't take us on. We're too big. We'll squash you like a bug.
Well, they still
You
might
have no
come back at me, but it's a risk.
Well, you're going to have a lot of people in your corner this time around. But what I want to get to here is you didn't back down. Now, you might have not taken the legal approach that you were originally intending to do, but you looked around different corners. You wrote this beautiful book. I mean, you're fighting the fight. You're not backing down. And that takes a word that we've talked about already, courage. What's your message to the underdogs in society, to the people listening to or watching this episode that say, man, there's a fight that I need to engage in, but I've been scared or too timid because I didn't know I had a different approach, or I want to get in the fight, but I can't. I call them the underdogs in society, my favorite kind of people. What's your message to them?
Well, I think that God calls certain people to take on certain issues. And like for myself, I'm wired not to walk away from things. And I think that the people who know that they need to take it to another level, in some cases, God may be telling them to run for office because they see this injustice in the legal system. I think that they have to be sensitive and be willing to take a risk. Because unless you take the first step, nothing's going to happen. And if you keep getting nudges and you can't rest and you believe you should do something, it's eating away at you. I think that's an indicator that maybe you need to do more. And it's not like, committing suicide. I think that there's some people that are trained, that are wired, and they know who they are. For those people, they need to, if they're Christians, prayerfully move forward. You don't have to do it all at once. It may be an incremental process. It may take you 5 to 10 years to be positioned to change that thing that's so wrong, but you have to be willing to step out there. And a lot of great things have happened for me since I left academia. If I had stayed in academia, I think my health would have deteriorated, faster. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed, but I know that the things that I'm doing now, I'm reaching far more people, and it doesn't feel like work. Having the interviews, writing the books, it does not feel like work.
Well, adversity can equal opportunity, and for you, it's brought on tremendous opportunity, and you sort of ended your answer by stumbling into my last question. You're a warrior, but I sort of look at you as a joyful warrior. You do everything kind of with a smile on your face and a big heart. And I mean this from a positive standpoint, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What do you wake up every day looking forward to?
Because of my faith, the thing that worries me the most is not taking advantage of the opportunities God has placed before me. I know so many people that are sick. They have debilitating, diseases. They're in pain. And we don't know if today is going to be our last day. And when I wake up in the morning, I give thanks. But I also, when I die, I want to stand before the Lord and have him say, well done, my good and faithful servant. I don't want to be on my deathbed thinking about things I could have done, should have done, would have done, but didn't do. So I want to be in the center of God's will. And to know God's will, I have to make time to listen. I don't always do this. Like, I don't have it all worked out. I am not perfect. but I'm striving to have more quiet time. And the scriptures that I post and those devotions, those are for me. I started sharing them with other people. And for the most part, that's what I'm doing. I'm ministering to myself as well as the people that read it and get comfort.
Dr. Swain, that's called leading by example. And that's the best way to lead, because it's, you could actually say, do as I do, not just do as I say. The book is The Gay Affair, Harvard Plagiarism and the Death of Academic Integrity. Please finish or leave us with where we can find you, what you're up to. Close us out any way you would like to.
I can tell you that I'm very active on X or Twitter. And so I would encourage you, if you're interested in what I'm doing or my opinions, follow me on X. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. I do far less on Facebook. And my books can be purchased on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, or if you go through my website, there's a Christian bookstore, Logos. You can order it through a Christian bookstore, and it can be personalized.
Well, that's excellent. Dr. Carol Swain, we thank you for being you and for being the example we need on We the People, but we also thank you for spending some time with us. God bless.